let's talk about Azure Bonds by Kate Novak and Jeff Grubb. This is a Dungeons and Dragons novel. It's the first in something called the Finder Stone trilogy. It isn't the first Forgotten Realms novel. Technically, it's from the second trilogy set in that setting, but it's really the first developed for it because the Moonshae trilogy was actually for a setting which was quite independent from the Forgotten Realms, which was then kind of retroactively built in. So Azure Bonds is about Alias, who wakes up. She's a warrior who wakes up with twisting magical sigils on her arm and no memory where she got them, and she ends up going on a quest to find out what's going on with them, and she meets up with her main companions are a halfling bard, Olive Ruskettle, a mage from Termish called Akbar, and a lizard man, a Sauriel technically, called Dragonbait. You can see there's Dragonbait and Alias on the cover there. And I enjoyed this. I thought this was good fun. It's something where, like, it's tie-in fiction. There are dangers here, aren't there? Lots of tie-in fiction is bad. And even amongst the good stuff, it's, there's often limitations. Essentially, I thought this was actually pretty fun. There are significant things which weren't great about it. Some obvious things are, Kate Novak is the writer here, and she does most of the writing, but you kind of get the sense that her game designer husband, Jeff Grubb, is throwing the information out at her to make sure it's fit in. So there are several descriptions of how spell use works in Dungeons and Dragons, and that's fine. But the way it's written is, and then this very particular description of a technical event happens that, for D&D fans, you'll know that's what happens in the game as well. But it's written in a very flat manner, a very awkward manner. And there's a few things like that. Similarly, it's not like the world building that happens. I mean, it's set in Cormyr, which is a fun area, and Westgate. It's a fun area of the realms, very important in Ed Greenwood's early mythos. Probably a reason this is where it's set. But it's not, particularly well detailed or rich. Equally, it's not like it's incredibly well written in terms of it's not beautiful or anything. I mean, it's not badly written either. I'll get to that. But there's in many ways, there's not much to commend it as an all-time great fantasy novel, which it isn't. But it's just quite good. It's quite solid, and I've thought about why. I think one thing is just structurally, plot-wise, it basically works. It has a sort of it's not amazing, but the fact it goes from A to B to C and it gets you there, and it gets you there on time in under 400 pages, and it does it with a writing style that is very clean, and at points even bright and sprightly and sharp. It has some actual moments that kind of get you to smirk, or got me to smirk at least. I think that's good. The fact that it's decent fantasy adventure is not to be sniffed at. In that way, there's a funny way in which tie-in fiction has, I think, sometimes become the successor of pulps. Maybe without the absolute soaring successes of the best pulps, but a success to pulps in terms of just stuff that works, and that gets the thing done, because that's what people are buying the novel to do. They want to kind of say the thing, and then have a story where the Jedi do the thing. The other thing that really, I think, succeeds here is the characters. And it's funny because I wouldn't want to be like, this is so psychologically deep, or the dialogue is so representative of these wonderful characters. But the four main characters and some secondary characters, I think this is the first appearance of Elminster in fiction, in kind of standalone fiction, not integrated bits in books, in RPG books. But the characters are just really quite successful for a pulpy, simple story. All four of those main characters I mentioned, so Alias, Ruskettle, Akbar, and Dragonbait, they're all distinctive. You recognise them when they're speaking. They all have character arcs. They all have objectives and purposes. They all have things that happen over the course of the book, which change them, where they become a different person to some degree by the end. Particularly the two humans and the halfling. The Sauriels themselves are a great invention. I massively enjoy them as a bit of D&D lore. That's the best bit of world building going on in the book. And Dragonbait is a great character. So good that he was brought back decades later He's in a few other novels, I should say, but brought back decades later to be in a 5th edition adventure in Dungeons and Dragons. So the current edition. And yeah, that's it's fun. You know, the characters are fun. I like the characters. I like their adventures. I wanted to see what happened to them. The fact that other things were either technically okay but not impressive, or perhaps they were just, you know, a little subpar or a little simplistic. I could get over that because I wanted to see what happened to the characters. And when I think, you know, we talk so much about how amazing someone like Joe Abercrombie is. We talk a lot about these great character writers, but actually you can go and just dip into this essentially random, very easy to read, much shorter than an Abercrombie novel, D&D tie-in from the late 80s about a lady with magical blue tattoos and a weird dragon dude. And you find that there is just the basic craft of writing characters better than lots of other much more famous, much more respected fantasy writers. So if that sounds interesting, I recommend it. I suspect it will have a slightly bigger appeal to D&D fans than to people who don't care, because they think, oh, well, I get to learn about the world. I think it's a decent example of 80s heroic / sub-epic fantasy. It kind of verges into the epic zone more than Gemmell does, but let's say it's kind of in that kind of liminal zone between the heroic fantasy and the epic fantasy. And I think if you just want a good example of that, this is it as well. If you have read the Finder Stone trilogy, tell me what you think in the comments. If you have read other D&D fiction, tell me what your favourite D&D novels are. Till next time.